Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Glad that you are here. We're going to start in Genesis 13 this morning. We're going to go back a few chapters. Genesis 13 is where we're going to start this morning if you have a Bible, an app, or a scroll with you this morning. When I was in college, I had the privilege of meeting Pastor Justin Kemmer in 2003. My junior year of college, and then Pastor Matt as well. We all kind of became buddies and roommates back then. It feels like a long time ago, but there was a constant dialogue every single night. And the dialogue was around food, and it was around what are we going to eat for the fourth meal? Now, I don't know if you know what the fourth meal is. Now, some of you don't know what that is. It's an important part of our routine in life. The fourth meal is the meal between 9 p.m. and midnight, okay? 9 p.m. and midnight is the fourth meal. And so we would talk every night about what are we going to eat, all right? And Justin used to keep like carrot sticks in our refrigerator in our room, which I thought was super lame, all right? Just so we're on the same page. But we'd have this discussion, and Justin and I still laugh today about a theme that I have in my life, right? And so I'm going to share this theme with you, and I hope this is a judgment-free zone, all right? So my theme back then was this: there's always time for one more bad decision, okay? There's always time for one more bad decision. Now, when I say that, that sounds really bad, right? But the truth is there's context to that statement, and the statement was always about the fourth meal, all right? So don't judge me. You're getting angry at me. I can see your faces, all right? It was about the fourth meal, right? There's always time for one more bad decision. The question we want to wrestle with this morning is this: what could cause your life to implode? What could cause your life to implode? Isn't it true? We've all seen people implode their life. And could it not come back to this motto? That there's always time to make one more bad decision. If you were to throw your life away this morning, what are the decisions that you would make, or the choices that you would make in your life? Isn't it true that we don't wake up one day and say this: you know what, today's the day I think I'm gonna throw my life away. Today's the day I'm gonna make a choice to implode my life. That's typically not how it goes. It starts with making small decisions that eventually result in a big issue. Isn't that true? And so I wonder if there's a common theme. And anyone that you know that have imploded their life, and anyone that I know that's imploded their life, there seems to be this common theme. And that theme is this: there's a willingness to be unwise. There's a willingness to be unwise. Are you willing to be unwise? You see, I think one of the questions that we all need to ask every day, maybe multiple times a day, is this: what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? You see, I think we all know what it's like to make decisions that are not good. But here's the truth: you don't implode your life on accident. An imploding life exists because there's a willingness to be unwise. You see, everyone takes the same path. This morning, we're going to talk about the domino effects of destruction. All right, and we're going to see that if you want to implode your life, there's a 4-step process to actually make that reality in your life. And so I think we can all resonate with all of these dominoes, but let me just quickly share all four of them with you up front so you can see them. You can see the whole path at one time if someone wants to implode their life. And it starts with this: it's a looking, a lusting, a longing, and a living. A looking, a lusting, a longing, and a living. And if I was to define those 4 terms, you can see the whole thing up front. We would say a looking is you see it. A lusting is you want it. A longing is you need it. And a living is you get it. This is the path that we can all take if we don't make wise decisions. And so this morning, as we work through each of these dominoes, I want you to see it all together up front on the screen, but that I also want you to consider, right, are you in any place in these dominoes today? What would cause you to implode your life? We're going to start at the beginning. We've been working through the book of Genesis. We picked it up last week and ended in Genesis 19 with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, with the character being Lot. And what we want to do is do a little bit of a case study on Lot's life this morning, because it's through his life that we actually see this process. These 4 dominoes have a profound effect on his life. And so we're going to start in Genesis 13. We're going to work our way back up to Genesis chapter 19. And we're going to start with looking, right? And we define it as this, as you see it. Let's start in chapter 13. We're going to look at a single verse, right? And it says this in verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So let me just give some backstory if you're new with us this morning. In Genesis chapter 12, God goes to a guy named Abram, and he says, I want you to forsake your family, forsake your religion, your gods, and I want you to come follow me. And Abraham does. He forsakes everything, and he follows the Lord. But in following the Lord, he also brought his nephew Lot with him. And what was happening through the book of Genesis, we saw in a couple different stories that Abraham gained a lot of wealth. And as Abraham got wealthy, his nephew Lot got wealthy. And eventually what we know in Lot's story is that Lot ended up loving wealth so much, you could actually argue on some level it actually became his God. In the beginning of Genesis chapter 13, we know this, that Abraham and Lot are all in the land together, and they have so much wealth and so much possessions, they decide they need to separate. And so Abraham comes to Lot and he says this, hey Lot, you can choose to go in any direction you want. You go east, right? Then I'll go west. You go west, and Lot, I will go the other direction. You get to decide where you want to actually go first. And so because he has choice, verse 10, it says this again. See the first phrase with your own eyes. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and he what, church? What's the word? He saw. He saw. This look is domino 1 about to fall. This one right here, he saw. By the way, that's the exact same word in Genesis chapter 3 when Eve set her gaze in verse 6 on the tree. She saw, it said. And this tension is what's happening in Lot's actual heart right here. And by the way, just so we're clear, the decision he's about to make is going to affect everyone in his entire family. Well, what did Lot see? We already read it. He saw all the Jordan Valley. He saw that it was well watered. He saw it was described like this, like the garden of the Lord is the description of that way. It's like Egypt, where they went where there was a famine and there was still food and water there. Man, that place is beautiful. That place is incredible. And by the way, this single look is the downfall of Lot's life. Hey men, hey husbands, hey fathers, the decisions you make matter. The decisions and the choices that you make can leave a legacy for generations. And what's happening in Lot's heart right here and what he's about to do is it's going to have a profound effect on everyone in his immediate family. He has to ask the question, what's the wise thing to do? How you lead your family matters. And isn't it true, man? There are times when we look and we see something, and what we see dictates what we do. But here's the thing, we need to be able to ask the question, when we see it, we need to ask the question, is this wise? Is this gonna encourage me? Is this gonna pull me towards the Lord or actually pull me away from the Lord? We need to wrestle with what we actually see, because if there's a willingness to be unwise, when we know that's in us, here's what we need to do. We need to stop looking, because that decision is gonna impact every single person around us. And for Lot, he doesn't stop. He wants it. He doesn't walk away from it. He's about to walk towards it. You see, and what's going to happen in Lot's heart, what's building up in him is actually going to build up in his wife's heart. And it's actually going to build up in his daughter's heart. And it's going to have a profound effect on everybody around him. So make no mistake, every decision we make matters. What will cause you to implode your life? It starts with a looking, you see it, but then it's going to move to a lusting, and you want it. Look at chapter 13 again. We're going to look at verse 11 and 12. it says this, so Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus he separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom, they were wicked. They were great sinners against the Lord. So Lot has the choice. You choose the land you want, and what does he do? He looks up, he lifts his eyes, and he looks to the area that he wants. It's well-watered, it's beautiful, it's what's gonna be best for my family, and he wants it. So now there's this lust that's building up inside him where he desires that one thing more than anything. Isn't it true that lust always leads us away from God? It never leads us towards God? And isn't it also true that lust is actually never satisfied? It always creates a craving in our hearts and our lives for more of the things that are actually against the Lord. And so here's what Lot did. Lot made a decision on what he wanted. And what did it say? It says this, he chose all of the Jordan Valley. I don't know if you've been to Israel and see the Jordan Valley. There's some room there, okay? He chose all of it. Like he wanted the whole thing for himself. No one else could have any. He wanted every aspect of the valley. He didn't want to share it. You see, I could argue that his lust for the valley overcame his love for the Lord. You see, here's the thing about Lot, and we can see in our own life, is that the call of Sodom was building in his heart long before he ever moved in there. It was building in him. And here's what lust will cause you to do. Lust will cause you to compromise. It'll cause you to make decisions, right? Not out of conviction, but out of convenience. And every decision you make leads you somewhere. Every decision will cost you something. 2 weeks ago, I took my boys, Malik and my youngest and my oldest, to Krug's Cruisers because their school had this event for father-sons to go and kind of spend a few hours there. And so there's about 200 people of fathers and sons from the elementary school that went to Krug's Cruisers. And so we went for 3 hours, and the boys were, they thought it was, I guess, heaven, okay? Would that be a good way to describe it? They thought it was the best. Now, here's what we learned. The place is pretty big. It's been a long time since I've been there. And we were just walking around. They were playing games or doing laser tag, doing whatever they wanted to do. And I noticed that everybody in the whole building, that's not fair, not everybody, majority of the people in the whole building knew who Johnny was, my youngest. Right? And everyone was like, yo, Johnny! And they're coming up and they're giving him fist bumps, and Johnny's like working the room, just like high-fiving, fist bumps, what's up, bro? What's up, bro? What's up, bro? I'm like, what is going on with bro? Right? That's what I'm wondering, but here's what was happening. My oldest started to notice it. And he realized that everyone here knows Johnny, but no one knows me. You see, what was happening in his heart was this wanting to be known. And as an adult, I can say, I get that. You get it, right? He wanted that. And he asked out loud. He asked me, Dad, why does everyone here know Johnny? I don't know. Apparently he's working the halls at school. I don't know what's actually happening. But the truth is, I know what he was saying. Lot wants Sodom. And the challenge for Lot was this: if I stay with Abraham and if I follow the Lord, will he actually give me what I actually want? And the truth is this: God doesn't always give you what you want. He gives you exactly what you need, right? But lust doesn't care about need. Lust actually is about want. And so Lot was making decisions, right? And what he was doing is he was turning, really I would argue in some way, turning away from God. And eventually that leads us to actually replace God. And here's what happens, and maybe you've seen this rhythm in your life, is that when you compromise on small things, eventually you'll compromise on big things. And if all you do in your life is actually compromise on your convictions, guess what happens? Eventually, your compromises become your convictions. And by the way, this is what's building up in his wife, and this is what's going to build up in his daughters. So it starts with a looking, and then a lusting, but then we get to a longing. Let's turn to chapter 14. We're going to look at one verse in verse 12. And in chapter 14, Abraham, as Lot and Abraham are separated, he goes in to rescue Lot. He rescues Lot. And when it tells us this in verse 12, so as Abraham rescued him, it says they also took Lot, the son of Abraham's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and they went their way. Hey, church, The road of lust has absolutely no end. By the way, let's go back to 13. Hey, Lot, choose wherever land you want to go. He looks up, he lifts his eyes. He desired all of the Jordan Valley. Let's be honest with you, I don't think Lot was saying this. I want my mailbox to be in Sodom. I want a mailing address in Sodom. I don't think in chapter 13 that's what was happening. But here's the thing. When you live next to Sodom, eventually you're going to live in Sodom. When you make that choice to say, I just want to live on the border, I just want to live just outside that place, eventually the lure of that place is going to pull you into it. And here we see in verse 12, where does he live? He doesn't live outside Sodom. It says he was dwelling in Sodom. Hey, church, you cannot walk the line and you cannot live in both places. You have to make a decision. I don't think Lot is concerned about the sin of the city. I think he liked the vibe of the city. I think he was lured by the awe of the city. And notice this, the longer that Lot is outside Sodom, right? Eventually this is building in him to get inside Sodom. You see, to be accepted in Sodom, you had to compromise somewhere. What do I mean by that? Here's the thing. You couldn't live in Sodom and take a stand for Jesus. Like that actually wouldn't be possible, right? That's not the way that this would work. You couldn't live in Sodom and plant a church. It's not gonna work. That's not the way of the culture. You see, the way that you survive in Sodom is by being passive in every way. And so while Sodom was very much living in rebellion, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, I don't think Lot agreed with that at all, but I think Lot was unwilling to speak up. And we'll see him speak up later in 19. But there's this way of life that you be you, I'm going to be me, and there's a reason why he wanted to be in that city, and we'll also see that in a few moments. But there's this longing in his heart where he absolutely needs it. You see, when we care more about pleasure or possessions or position, then what you're going to do is you're going to compromise with the Lord. And so I don't think he participated necessarily in the sin of the city, but I think he stood by and kept his mouth shut. What would cause you to implode your life? There's a looking, there's a lusting, there's a longing, and lastly, there's a living. You get it. We're going to turn to chapter 19. And we talked about this last week. We're going to review a little bit of the story. But I want you to see verse 1. It says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. All right, so if you've been with us, we saw that God was having dinner with Abraham, and he brought two men with him. These angels, they leave the dinner with Abraham in chapter 18, and they head into Sodom. And what happens when they actually get there? Well, we know that there's this conversation happening with Lot. You see, now these angels are in Sodom. And how was Sodom described in chapter 13? We read it. Do you remember? They were described as wicked, and they were described as great sinners against the Lord. What does that mean? I think it means this. There's a willingness to be unwise. The question they were not asking in Sodom is, what's the wise thing to actually do? God described them as great sinners. Well, what does it mean that they're great sinners? In Ezekiel chapter 16, God calls out Jerusalem by comparing them to Sodom. And look at what he says about Sodom in 49 and 50. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excessive food, prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy. They were haughty, and they did abominations before the Lord. So what did God say he did? I removed them. I remove them. God is actually calling out Jerusalem, by the way, in Ezekiel 16. And to be honest with you, he calls them whores a lot in that chapter. And here's what he's saying. You're being worse than this. But here we know this. We see a description of Sodom. And so what was Sodom described as? It's described as a place of pride, excessive food, great restaurants, prosperous ease, security, influence, position, comfortable. And so in Genesis 19, When we talk about, right, the dominoes of destruction, we can make the argument that the city of Sodom was already in the fourth stage. They're already living exactly how they want to live. So is it possible that we could describe Sodom as this? Sodom can be described as whatever your imagination can dream of, you have authority to do. Think about that. Whatever your imagination can dream of, you have authority to do. God mentions this place was prideful, excessive food, right? Prosperous ease, crazy comfortability, abominations. Honestly, on some level, on a mini scale, it sounds a little bit like America. Excessive food, do what you want, prosperous ease, pride, every man for themselves. You see, we could argue that this is uninhibited indulgence. If you can imagine it, do it. If you can dream it, experience it. There are no boundaries, there are no rules, there are no barriers, there are no guardrails. Every man for themselves. Whatever you can imagine, experience it. And so when the angels walk into Sodom, what does Lot do? He greets them, he falls on his face, he treats them with respect. And then we see this, he invites them to his house. Why his house? Because here's the truth. Lot knows if they go stay in the city like they say they want to do, if they're going to go stay in the town square, things are going to go bad for them. I know what the city's like. I live here. Come, stay at my house. And he forcefully invites them to his place. And what happens? Look at verse 4 and 5. We saw it last year. We're going to see it again. It says, but before they lay down, in verse 4, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance and shut the door after them, and he said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Hey, church, this is one of the darkest texts in the whole Bible. Do you understand that? This is a dark text. Lot invited these two men, he didn't know they're angels, but they were angels, these two angels to stay at his house to protect them. And it tells us it's already at night. And all of a sudden, what do the texts say? The old men and the young men, what do? From the entire city, they gather at the door. I have a couple questions. First question is this. What did these old men teach these young men? Just so we're clear, this is indoctrination at the highest level. This is indoctrination here. They've taught these young men how to actually live, and their agenda is anti-God and it's anti-gospel. And so the message from the older men to the younger men is this, and they're showing it, they're all doing it together. Pursue pleasure at all costs. Pursue pleasure at every step of the way. Live for yourself. Nobody can tell you no. No one can tell you how to live. You can define yourself by whatever you want to be and whatever you want to do. It's a free game. You be you. And if you didn't agree with their agenda, you weren't going to make it in this city. Hey, church, indoctrination is happening all over our country. Indoctrination is happening in our state. It's happening in our city. We see it starting to build a little bit in our school districts. And here's how this is going to play out. Our culture is going to try to shut down any voice that stands against its agenda. But let me give you hope. We can look in Genesis chapter 19, and we can see that this indoctrination is clearly taking place, but indoctrination that's against the Bible, that's against God, that's against his good news, is going to always, every single time, end in destruction. We know that. Do you realize that the world doesn't define morality? We don't go to the world to help us understand what that looks like. We go right here, right? This is the place for us. Right here in God's word every single time. By the way, church, just so you know, don't be intimidated by this. Don't be nervous or scared by this. Jesus told us this is going to happen. Persecution is going to be the result of living in this world. It's coming for you. Are you willing to take a stand for him? It's coming. Second question I have is, what does it mean when all the young men and all the old men of the city said to Lot, we want to know these men. We actually want to know them. You see, I think what we're seeing here again is the mindset of Sodom. Uninhibited indulgence. They're already at the end of destruction. They've gotten what they want. So just to be clear, homosexuality was a way of life for them. But I think it goes further than homosexuality. I think it goes to sexual violence, because the heartbeat of the city of all the old men and all the young men at the door is to rape these men. They're not gonna ask them their opinion. They're not gonna ask them what they think about this. They're gonna do to the men what they want to do to the men. They're going to overpower them and have their way. That's sexual violence. This year in June will be 18 years for my wife and I of being married. And we had a lot of people standing at our wedding. I think it was like 8 to 10 people on each side. I can't remember the total number. But Steph had a young friend from childhood who always battled just homosexual tendencies. She was attracted to women, and for most of her life, up to that point, she wanted to live to honor the Lord. But then came a day when she made a shift. And she's been married to a couple different women, and ultimately, I remember having a discussion with her, and she would say this, and many of the homosexual community does say this, that Genesis chapter 19 is not about the sin of homosexuality, it's about the sin of pride. Now let me be honest. Ezekiel 16, what's the first thing that God said about Sodom? Pride. Selfishness was the sin, right? That is very evident. But let me be clear that Genesis chapter 19 is all about sexual immorality, including homosexuality as sin. And how do I know that? Because here's the best thing to do. When you look at a text like this, what you need to do is survey the rest of the Bible and say, what does the rest of the Bible actually say about Genesis chapter 19? And we saw Ezekiel 16, but look at what Jude verse 7 says. Jude says this, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So Jude starts by saying this, that Sodom and Gomorrah, they pursued every form of sexual immorality. He calls out sexual immorality. Hey church, you might be here and you're having premarital sex right now. I want you to know this, that God sees you, God loves you, God has a plan for your life, and are you willing to surrender your sexuality to him? You might be here this morning and you're living in adultery, and I want you to know this, that God sees you, he knows you, he loves you, he has a plan for your life, and the question is, will you surrender your sexuality to him? You might be here and you might be just trapped, right, by the prison of pornography. Listen, God sees you, he knows you, he has a plan for your life. Are you willing to surrender your sexuality to him? Sexual immorality is sin. Yet Jude also points out, in Sodom and Gomorrah, he highlights unnatural desire, which is homosexuality. You can tie it back to Romans chapter 1. And if you are in that lane, if that's you, you have that pull, you have that tension in your life. I want you to hear me. God sees you. He loves you deeply. He has a plan for your life. Are you willing to surrender your sexuality to him? This text is dark. And so what happens next? What happens next is this, is the angels inside, they blinded the eyes of all the young men and old men, all the men of the whole city. And so guess what happened? They're searching for the door to try to get to the men, and they can't actually find the door. It's a crazy story. And then we get to verse 15 and 16, later in the text, and take a look at it with me. It says, as morning dawned, so this has been all night, this has been happening. The angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in punishment by the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought them outside the actual city. So what do the angels say later? Hey, Lot, get up. It says they urged them, get out of here. Get your wife, get your daughters, and get out. Save yourself. And what does Lot do in verse 16, church? He lingers. There's longing in him. No, I need this place. My identity is wrapped, I know there's bad in the city, I know it's a gross city, but my identity is wrapped up in my life in this place, God. While the angels had an urgency to get him out, to say, get out, Lot, I would argue, had an urgency to stay. He didn't want to leave the place. So what did the angels do? The story goes on and tells the angels dragged him by the hand. His wife, his daughters, they dragged them out, because when you're trapped in the looking and the lusting and the longing and the living, you can never actually save yourself. They were never going to leave on their own. Lot and his family, they needed divine intervention. By the way, the longing in Lot's wife is also happening in his wife's heart. You see, she experienced Sodom. She fully supported their lifestyle there. She wanted it and she loved it. Her identity was wrapped in it. The wealth they had, the great house they had, the best stuff, maybe the best school systems in the area. Yet it's through Lot that we learn a really important lesson, is that you can take Lot and his family out of Sodom, but it's much harder to get Sodom out of them. That takes something more powerful. And by the way, church, we have sin in us. Do you see it? We have it deep in us. It's there, it's present. We can't get the sin out. There's got to be someone better than us to actually do it. And Lot could not get himself out of the city. He needed a rescue. You need a rescue. I need a rescue. We need someone better than us to invade the mess of our lives, right? And save us out of this. So then we get to verse 23. Let's read this a little bit together. It says, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like a smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham, and he sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. And so here's what happens, right? Because of the tension, because God said back in 13, Sodom and Gomorrah had not yet been destroyed, we knew it was coming. It was going to actually happen. And so what is this? How did God do this? I don't know, right? But we could make the argument that it's some kind of like molten rain that was falling out of heaven onto Sodom and Gomorrah. And so what does this mean? This rain, this fire fell all over the city, and it burned everything it touched. Listen, every man done, every woman done, every child done, every produce or things you grow in the garden, all the food gone, all the animals done, all the possessions destroyed. God made Sodom a scorched graveyard. Why? His patience was up. He's been patient for a long time. His patience is gone. Sodom is an example of what happens when man is left to their own imagination. And Sodom is also an example of what will happen to the wicked. Do you realize that the destruction of Sodom started long before it was actually destroyed? It was decision after decision, a willingness to be unwise, refusing to ask the question, what's the wise thing to do? And it resulted in everything being destroyed. It was years in the making. Is loving the world worth your eternity? Because Genesis 19 is the story of you getting what you actually want. The problem is this: what we often want will lead to our destruction. So we can view this, right, this destruction, right? We can view it as a hard warning for us that if we don't fear the Lord, and therefore because we don't fear him, we're going to choose to align ourselves with whoever wins the day in the culture, we're going to be destroyed. And so I wonder how many here would say, man, I hate Sodom, but if we're going to be honest, there's some Sodom here. been building for maybe a long time in your heart and in your life. The text tells us twice that the judgment was decided and executed by the Lord. But notice verse 26 with me. Look at what it says. Lot's wife behind him looked back and she became a pillar of salt. She looked back. The angel said this. He dragged him out. Get out of here. Don't look back. And what did she do? She's already behind them. She's behind Lot and behind her daughters. And she turns and she looks. Some believe that she actually went back to the city. Why? The cry of my stuff. The cry of her heart was, this is my life, my identity, my possessions. Everything I'm about is there. And the result is what? She immediately became a pillar of salt. Think about this for a moment, church. She was just saved from judgment. She just experienced the mercy of God. She just experienced the love of God. She experienced a rescue out of Sodom. God did not give her what she deserved. And that did not create a great fear of the Lord in her life. And so while the angels had urgency to get her out, her life was all about the urgency of getting back in. And Jesus warns us in the Gospel of Luke. He talks about possessions. And he says this, to the context of the day, all he said was this: remember Lot's wife. Just remember her. Remember her longing. Here's the scary part, and I want everyone in the room to hear this. Even God's deliverance couldn't shift her devotion. Are you hearing that? That's so scary. Even God, a holy God that we sang about, choosing to be merciful and loving and rescue her out of her own mess, even that couldn't win her devotion. Man, that's scary. Then we get to verse 30 through 38. And the way of Sodom just keeps going. It says, now Lot went up to Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters. Wife's dead. Everything he has is gone, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters, and the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old. There's not a man on earth to come in us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine. We will lie with him, that we may preserve our offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. And the next day the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, that you may go and lie with him, that we may preserve our offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The first bore a son, called his name Moab. Then we see the younger gave birth to a son, who was the Ammonites of the day. The path of destruction, every imagination, do what you want to do. This is where that actually leads you. My question is, why are they living in a cave? Why not return to Abraham? Why not return to your uncle, who's also has crazy wealth? He has enough to take care of your family. He's rescued you out of other things in the past. He intervened with the Lord for you to even get rescued out of Sodom. So why not go back to your uncle, who I'm sure would love to see you and take care of you? I don't know. He didn't do it. And then we see Lot's daughters also loved the idea of Sodom. And by the way, their future husbands, they were engaged, were actually killed in Sodom. Lot went to them and said, let's go, this place is going to be destroyed. And they thought it was a joke. They burned. And so here they are living in a cave. There's no other men. And the social society of the day was having children very important. So the daughters were not thinking about just the idea of having sex. They actually wanted children. And so they devised a plan to actually get their own dad drunk and get him wasted and get him in a spot where he can't remember anything. And then we're going to have sex with him. And then we're going to get pregnant by our own dad. And it happens on back-to-back nights. Incest, church. You see, I think they remember, too, their dad offering them up to all the old men and young men of the city to protect the two angels. And I think inside that cup of wine was probably a little deceit, probably a little bit of dishonor. But here's the crazy part. Lot's responsible. Hey, church, being drunk is a sin. Do you know that? Do I have to say that? We see it right here. It's a willingness to be unwise, right? Heed the warning. And Lot is responsible, even though he doesn't actually remember any of it. And guess what happens? It gives birth to the way of Sodom again. God just destroyed Sodom. And now his daughters are pregnant from him. And this is how Lot's story ends. Are you encouraged? Hey, I think Lot's story is the biblical reality and truth of this, that sin will take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. Where's the hope? Here's the hope. One of the daughters gave birth to Moab. From Moab's line, we learn of this amazing person named Ruth. And from that line, we learn about this awesome king named David. And from David, we eventually learn about the King of Kings that we've been singing about every time we gather at Redemption Church, and his name is Jesus. You see, he doesn't care how hopeless your situation seems to you. He's going to invade that, and he's going to do what he wants to do for his own glory and for your good. You see, he can rescue anything. Nothing is outside of his hope that he actually carries out. And so our gospel takeaway this morning is this, is that God's love empowers you to pick up the pieces and start over. What do I mean by that? Only God's love allows you to pick up the pieces and turn and create something new. He meets you in the mess, and he picks you up, and he does a work in your heart that only he can actually do. He empowers you to do that. But here's how it typically plays out for us. We know that God's loving. We know that God's actually willing to do a work in our life. But after our 4-step process, all the dominoes fall. We hate what we see. We feel shameful. We feel like failures. And so we're just going to go ahead and start it all over again. We're going to start looking again. Then we're going to lust, and then we're going to long, and then we're going to live. And that's going to lead to failure. Let's start again. I'm going to look. I'm going to lust. I'm going to long for something. And then I'm going to live in it. And it's going to result in failure. There's another way, church. There's another way in the love of Jesus. By the way, 2 Peter chapter 2 tells us this about Lot. Lot was a righteous man. Wait, what? That's what I want to say. What are you talking about? Lot was a righteous man. He hated a lot of what was happening in Sodom. But he also was lured by it. And the Bible tells us that Lot was righteous. How are you righteous? By the way, we could say Lot doesn't deserve that. Let me be clear. I don't deserve it, and either do you. Lot stood before the Lord just as if he never sinned and always perfectly obeyed. How can that be true? This guy slept with his own daughters. It was a constant willingness to be unwise because of the personal work of Jesus. There's hope, church. And so no matter what you bring in here this morning, no matter the baggage, no matter the shame that may be winning in your life, there's always hope. You see, what Jesus does is he actually ushers in a new path, and I'm going to hit it real quick. All right? It's not a path of destruction, it's a path of devotion, right? And here's the dominoes. It's a leaving, a looking, a loving, and a living. It's a leaving, meaning this, I abandon it, right? Sin, you leave all the sin behind. It's a looking, I see it, that there's someone who loves me so deeply. There's actually a loving that you're gonna embrace, that this God loves you in such a way that he'll change your life. And then there's this living your life in light of a holy God who would love you so deeply. That's the cycle. That's the pathway of devotion, leaving, looking, loving, and living. And so the question is, what will break the cycle? 3 things quick. If you know Christ, it's going to start with conviction. If you have the Spirit in you, what the Spirit does is he points out things that need to go. He brings them to light for all of us to see clearly. And then the next step is confession, like us being honest about what the Spirit is actually convicting us of. And then I think a third step that's vital to the Christian life is actually community, a devotion to live with others. And it can be one person, it can be 2 people, it doesn't be 50, but who knows you? Who actually knows you? Who knows your struggles? Who knows your mess? Who knows where shame exists in your heart and in your life? It's all gonna start with the Spirit. And so here's the other thing. If you don't feel the Spirit, right, revealing sin in your life, you're probably not saved. And today's the day to give your life to Christ. He loves you deeply. And so wherever you are right now, I don't know where you're at on the dominoes. I don't know what you're thinking or what you're processing. This is a really dark text we spent some time looking at this morning. I just wanna give you a moment to go before the Lord right now between you and him. And so let's do that. Let's be honest. And let's thank him for his love for us. Go ahead.